ours who painted that, and he painted another one somewhere.
Debbie,
But these are...
Yes.
would you like just to stand in there and look at the picture, and then we can...
Oh, okay.
yeah.
Okay,
I'm
okay.
just doing a movie thing
Do
at
you,
the moment.
take
That one
turns
with that
giving
cross on.
tours?
That's not Red Cross.
Or do you
that's
take turns giving tours? Is that
That's a
how?
full
No,
pop-up.
I think
just the usual people.
Spitfire going after it.
Okay.
But yeah, there's some great features here.
And all of them you just kind of discovered, or?
Yeah.
Right, wow.
I forget this one here.
Oh, sorry, I probably turned right at the wrong
I
time.
need my glasses.
I'd love to see that picture of Elsenport.
Yes, that would be, Mom, you should send that to. He's got a really nice big picture like this of a P-51.
Oh, really?
It's all framed though, I don't know how easy that would be to ship, but I suppose we could unframe it, but.
Yeah.
Can you folks just explain as to who you exactly are, so that I can have this on the movie, so that we can...
Wow.
For
You
Martin
want
as
to
well.
say? Oh, my dad, Eldon Troji,
Right.
was a pilot and who was stationed at, or resided at Kesgrave Hall.
Right.
And then flew out of Martlesham Heath for a year and a half,
Yep.
right? So
Talk
Okay.
about that.
And what year was that, 1943?
43 to 45.
Right, okay, thank you. Okay, and you're over here on a holiday or what?
We're on it here, yes.
Okay,
yes.
that's fine.
And that-
actually, how it started, just so you know, is we went on a vacation last year and we talked about where should we go next. And I asked Mom if there was something in particular she would really love to see
Right.
again. And Martlesham Heath was what it was.
How about that then?
Yes.
Yeah.
And has really sort of captured our imagination, really, because it gives the appearance of a very nice, relaxed country, a beautiful setting, really. And that was one of Tarky's pictures.
Everything was perfect, really, wasn't it? With the blue sky,
Yes,
green trees.
yes.
Yeah, that we
Another paint
feature
job,
that on
you know.
quite a lot of things. This is the station history, as you can see, 1917 to 39, the Royal Flying Corps, and then the RAF.
Oh, yeah.
39 to 45, of course, World War II.
Right, John?
The Royal Air Force and the USAF 356 Fighter Group, and then returned to research duties and then civilian use. So these are the 4 periods. And this is really one of the things that, in fact, that little plane that you see sitting on the top, a little Bristol Scout, was the first plane to land at Martlesham Heath, and that was 1916. Down at Felixstowe, where you went when you came here last time.
Oh, okay, right, you were telling me about Felix Stowe. That's-
Yeah. Well, lots of people don't know, but down there was a naval station, but it wasn't for land-based aircraft, it was for sea boats, and a huge complex down there. Of course, now it's a big container port, the largest
Yeah, I
container
remember
port in
it.
England now. But yeah, so that little plane used to take off on the top of this one here, and because it got wheels, as you can see, the nearest place was here at Martlesham, so it came and landed at Martlesham. So that was the first plane, and this was sort of the terrain that it would land on. But, of course, down in Upavon in Wiltshire, which you'll probably pass through Wiltshire as you go down to
Cotswolds.
the
That's all,
Cotswolds. Yeah. Down there, of course, was this large station down there, and they were training pilots for warfare for the First World War. They were doing aeroplane evaluations as well, and armaments testing. But it all became too much for one station. So the armaments moved out. And where did they go to? They came here to Orford Ness.
Oh,
Now,
wow.
Orford Ness is about 8 miles, 10 miles, just over there on the coast. It's a remote, it's not really a true island, but it's near enough. And there is a lighthouse there that's now been abandoned. And this is where they tested the guns and bombs. And that's the Black Tower that they used to follow the trajectory of the bombs so that they could measure all these things with bombs, etc. It's a very, very remote place. But of course, lots of aeroplanes were still being built, more and more aircraft. They were much simpler to build in those days, of course. And training pilots left little time for any aeroplane evaluation. So they decided to move, but where were they going to move to? Well, the gentleman that headed that was Colonel Henry Tizard. Now, Colonel Henry Tizard Later on out in the war, at the end of the war, actually went to America and, or just before the end of the war, gave all of our secrets, the jet engine, our atomic bomb, all the secrets to America, because
I bet he didn't like that.
there was a great fear that if we were overrun, all our secrets would be gone. So he was tasked with going over there. But he was also tasked in the first instance to find an airfield close to Orford Ness where these planes could be tested. It had to be close to a railway station, it had to be close to Orford Ness, and of course the little Bristol Scout landing here was to our advantage, if you like, and of course Martlesham was chosen. And this was what Martlesham looked like. This was one of the main roads through the camp. If you can see there where the horse and cart is, now that's a road that I as a child used to travel through.
What do we think that year is, Martin? About 1919-ish?
Yeah, probably would be, yes, yeah, because it's got the little German prisoners of
But that
war.
was all here?
Yeah,
Wow.
no, the little hangars were actually designed by Shorts of Belfast, shipbuilders. You've heard of IKEA? No?
Yeah, we do.
IKEA, flat pack. This was IKEA. They came as flat panels. These hangars, and they were built by First World War German prisoners of war.
And we shot them.
Yeah, but this little road through the camp was a road that actually ran through the camp. Just to show that there was a railway station, Little Beelings railway station there. So that was important to get people here and back to London.
So how far was that railway
Can you
station?
go back on that one, Martin?
Yeah.
Sorry, Debs.
You know where you're staying?
Mm-hmm.
If you continue past down the bottom of the hill, up the hill the other side, to the junction, go straight over the junction, railway station's just down there. Where Robert used to live.
Is
Yeah,
there
I
still,
tell
is there
you,
still
I
a
used to live
station
it.
there?
Sorry?
There's still a station there?
There's still a station, but they don't stop.
It's not
There's a notice there, it says Bob was here.
Yeah.
That's where my father was a coal merchant, and he used to have his coal brought in on the left there. That was a goods yard in there.
Oh.
But also,
Sorry.
the hangars that Martin talked about in 1928, the hangars that were built up here, my father as a young man contracted to bring all the glass up from the railway
Oh, yeah, yeah.
up for the hangars as a really young man.
Oh,
That's
right.
amazing.
Yeah.
And this was the initial staff at Martlesham Heath, and you can see Colonel Tizard there in the centre there. Lots of these names are people who went on to do all sorts of things in life. You only came to Martlesham, really, if you were at the top of the tree. This was, between the wars, the #1 or #2 station. So it was a very important place. Lots of names down there. You can see Carr there, Crikey Carr they called him. He was one of the station commanders here. Muspratt up there, you can see the name Muspratt. He was a pilot. He was a test pilot here at Martlesham. And so that's the 16th of January 1917. And this was the officers' mess. Wicker chairs, picture of the King and Queen in the background, and a lady visiting.
We think that young man looks very cross. What are you doing?
Yeah.
Yeah, he does.
Apart from, of course, testing our own aircraft, we tested captured German aircraft, and there is a German Albatross that was here at Martlesham for testing. 1st of April 1918, the Royal Air Force and the Women's Auxiliary Air Force were formed. Martlesham Heath then became RAF Martlesham Heath. Up until then, it was the Royal Flying Corps. At the end of World War I, the Armaments Experimental Flight, which was based at Orford Ness, which I told you about, actually came to Martlesham Heath. If you go down to Orford Ness, you can see why, because it's a windswept, barren landscape, and how those little planes ever, because there was an airfield there as well, how they actually ever flew from there, I really don't know. But anyway, they came here to Martlesham Heath to join up at Martlesham here. Of course, we tested not only fighter aircraft, but we also tested the bombers as well. And this is a Bristol Braemar, and that's how it ended up.
I was going to say, it doesn't look very
Did you
No.
notice the wings? The triple
Yeah.
wing.
Just a little much, huh?
The
Wow.
Pilot was Captain Sutton and the aircraft sheriff, and they were killed, but the two in the back escaped. The Captain Sutton, I just said that this was a very top, well, it was a top secret place between the wars, believe it or not. Captain Sutton was responsible for designing the Sutton harness that kept pilots strapped in. Didn't do him a lot of good on this, unfortunately, but he was the designer of the Sutton harness. 6th of October 22, Seaflight hangar caught fire. One of the little German hangars there caught fire, and the fire brigade from Woodbridge came along and they gave the orders through a bugle. They sounded the order through the bugle, and this was the scene the next day. Now, if you look in the background here, you can see a hangar there, and that's where Tesco's is now, the supermarket across the way.
But the one the other side, Martin's still there, isn't it?
No, the other one, that side there.
No, to the right.
Oh right, yeah, down below there, yes, yeah. We've still got one hangar here.
Was the fire just a fire, or was it a bombing, or was
No, there was a lot of theories about what happened,
Yeah.
and in there were a lot of captured German aircraft. And the theory is that an airman wanted some fuel for his motorbike and was draining some fuel out and it caught fire. But we shall never know. This was the largest aircraft that came to Martlesham Heath, the Beardmore Inflexible. If you go on YouTube and put in Beardmore Inflexible, you can see that flying. 1928, you can see that actually flying. It was built in the Scottish shipbuilding yards. There were only two built. It was shipped. They were shipped down here to Martlesham, to Ipswich docks, unloaded, brought to Martlesham, built, and there, as I say, only two were built, I think, and they didn't survive. They were no real
You know, they
consequence.
flew about a couple of times, didn't they?
One of the wheels is in the Science Museum in London now, but that aircraft was an all-metal aircraft. It was the first all-metal aircraft bomber, and it was broken up after the trials and left standing to see how that would weather with our weather. And there's the pilot, Flight Lieutenant Noakes, in a bowler hat.
Saying hello.
He looks like Poirot.
That's right. And from the ridiculous to the sublime, this was a silly little aircraft that never did anything at all. But also, of course, civilian aircraft had to come here to get their certificate of airworthiness. And this was a plane that belonged to Alan Cobham's Flying Circus. And it came here to be tested, and it had 10 seats. They tested the aircraft and found it fine, but then said, we can't give you your certificate because with 10 seats you have to have a radio. And Alan Cobham said, well, we're only going to fly locally around, we're not going to do any long distance work, we don't need a radio. 10 seats, you need a radio. So Alan Cobham said, okay, we'll take one of the seats out and put the radios in, put a radio in. Because the radios in those days were large. And they said, well, if you take out one of the seats, you don't need a radio. So that stupid nonsense that went on.
That was funny.
20th of March 1924, we took on a new title. We became the Aeroplane and Armaments Experimental Establishment, and we became top secret. This was a top secret airfield, and you try telling that to children when they see all the houses out here and all the rest of it. Two new squadrons were formed at that time, 15 Squadron, who tested the armaments, guns and bombs, and 22 Squadron, who tested the aircraft. Parachute testing was done here, and this was done by a Flight Lieutenant Potter, and they were affectionately known as the Loonies, because jumping out of a serviceable aircraft to test a parachute was silly. Now, two of their numbers were killed in silly accidents. Corporal East and Airman Brainy Dobbs were killed. East was killed at Biggin Hill. RAF Biggin Hill is a very nice airfield in the countryside, but at the end it dips away. So East thought he would jump out of this aircraft on a show day, and he would not open his parachute until he'd gone past where people could see. But he misjudged it and was killed.
Oh dear.
Yeah, and Dobbs was quite brazen. They were doing some balloon jumps with parachutes. They'd fill the balloons up so that when you jumped, it was like on the moon, if you like, you went way up and then down. But he didn't judged the high tension cables that were there, and he went into and was electrocuted, and the whole thing caught fire. But just to prove the point that Martlesham was a really top class place, Corporal Jewell went on to become a founder member, one of the founder members of the Martin Baker Ejection Seat Company. So lots of fighter aircraft have ejector seats in, built by Martin Baker. The Snyder Trophy was one of the highlights of this area. Although it's a seaplane, the pilots were actually from Martlesham Heath. And Flight Lieutenant Sidney Webster and Harry Allabar, who later became Air Vice Marshals, and John Botham, all won this trophy. It was held every 2 years for seaplanes, and it was the fastest seaplane over a given distance. And we won it 3 times, and we won the trophy outright. And the trophy is in the RAF Museum at Hendon. Huge big trophy.
Flight Lieutenant Webster was also captain of the British
He
Technical
was,
Club.
yeah, he was. Yeah, that's quite right. And there is a visit by King Edward VIII, and our question to the children is, what happened to King Edward VIII? And if they're very clever, they'll say he abdicated and his brother became king. George.
He's the one who fell in love with a married woman.
Exactly, yeah, that's right.
Okay.
Yeah.
And that all happened locally at Felixstowe. The court case, yeah, the divorce was in Ipswich and she stayed at Felixstowe. But there is, that's Edward VIII, and I think George the VI is this one here, I think. Yeah. The Hurricane, there's the prototype of the Hawker Hurricane that came in March 1936, and the Spitfire. Now the Spitfire, when that came, Martlesham were told not to do their normal testing on this particular aircraft. What they would normally do is take the aeroplane, strip it completely down, measure, check everything, put it back together. It would then be test flown in all sorts of situations. But they were told, they realised that this aircraft had got something special. So 2 weeks after it took its first flight down at Eastleigh in Hampshire, it came to Martlesham Heath for testing. They flew it, and of course it did turn out to be a very, very wonderful aircraft. And this is a very nice picture. This signifies, and there's a picture of it on the wall there, but this signifies the first airborne radar interception from an aeroplane to the ground. Now, one of our members, Keith Wood, he was a member and he died probably 5 or 6 years ago. He lived down at Felixstowe. Keith Wood was a member of Robert Watson Watt's team designing and building radar
At Bordsey.
at Bordsey. Wasn't called radar in those days, it was called radio directional finding. But Keith Wood, and if I press that little thing up there, Keith actually tells you the day that this was taken, or this picture was painted, what actually happened on that day. It was a misty morning. Our fleet had gone into the North Sea on an exercise, but this mist had come down and the exercise was cancelled. Keith Wood says, we were at Martlesham, he said, we thought we'd put all the gear in an aircraft and go and see if we could find the fleet. The gear those days, of course, was large stuff, so they had to strap it all in. They took off, went to the North Sea, and suddenly on their screen they saw this huge big blip, which were all these ships. And then they noticed lots of little blips coming up from one of these, and these little aircraft here on the aircraft carrier all took off, of course, to come and see who was above the home fleet. And that was the first recording of airborne radar from aircraft to the ground.
Martin,
So-
when you say touch that little speaker, you mean physically touch it? Or
No, if you,
cursor? Yeah.
it's not a very good thing, but
exercise, you see. So we got this house and teed up and ready for this morning. We're going to start.
Did you record this with Keith?
yeah, it came off the internet. We won't go through it, but that was
No.
Keith telling you exactly what happened on the day. This is Robert
Do you
Watson.
remember Keith?
Robert Watson Watt getting his certificate, if you like, for the work that was done. Lots of problems there because Robert Watson Watt headed the team, but he didn't do the work. lots of the scientists who did the work were a little bit upset with all of this.
He got £25,000 to do it.
Did he?
He's only got 5.
Some things never change.
This morning, the British ambassador in Berlin handed the German government a final note stating that unless we heard from them by 11 o'clock, that they were prepared at once to withdraw their troops from Poland, a state of war would exist between us. I have to tell you now that no such undertaking has been received, and that consequently this country is at war with Germany.
Oh, that must have been an awful thing to hear.
Playing that to children, and you know that's quite moving for them really. So World War II, 39 to 45, RAF mines in the shipping lanes to blow up our ships, because we really relied on all this food coming in and lots of materials, etc. We weren't self-supportive completely, so they dropped a lot of mines down. So we were going around the coast, you know, shooting down these mine-laying aircraft. And there, as a result of one of those mine-laying aircraft, this is Clacton, 1940, which is probably 20 miles down the coast. Yeah, something down the coast. This is Victoria Street on the 30th of April. Our archivist here, Alan Smith, who does all our records, he was at Clacton, and actually he didn't witness it, but it went the next morning, as all the kids do on cycles, and actually saw this. They shot this Heinkel aircraft, I think it was a Heinkel aircraft, and it tried to make a landing on a school pitch, football pitch or something, but didn't make it, crashed in amongst these houses. And when it crashed, of course, one of the mines blew up, and this was the result.
How is a mine different than a bomb?
A mine, they were magnetic mines. In other words, they dropped them in the sea. They were like porcupines.
And float.
And then when the ships came along, they would touch these metal spikes, and they were magnetic, you see, and once they made the connection, bang, up it went. And you see the propeller of the aircraft here. Now this actually was the first, there were 2 people killed, and these were the first deaths on mainland Britain in World War II. And there they are inspecting it. The strange thing was, you can see that looks like a water tank. Well, the magnetic mines come in all sorts. This one hasn't got the spokes, but the ones we know are spokes. But what happened was that they were sitting around the next morning on this tank, having their cups of tea, and a naval officer came along, and he said, I would suggest that you all move. Why? Because that's an unexploded mine that you're sitting on. So they all retreated, and it was defused, and of course was taken away. That sort of thing that happened. Now, World War II, of course, came along. We were very close to Germany, very close to the North Sea. And we've got all these secret aircraft, we're doing all this secret work. And they thought it was time that really Martlesham Heath moved out, or the ANAE moved out. So it moved out down to RAF Boscombe Down. And there's a picture of RAF Boscombe Down there.
And how far away is that from here?
Probably in hours, about 3 hours.
200 miles.
Yeah, around the, you might even see the signs as you go down. You'll see RAF Boscombe Down. No pictures, no. It's still there. Still tests aircraft. Well, if we had any aircraft to test. But if we modify an aircraft, it has to go there to be tested. But it's not done now by the RAF. It's done by a civilian organisation. So that's how far we've come down the route to civilianise. So that's where everything went. And we have a wonderful relationship with them. We've been there on a couple of occasions, and they've really done us proud. Just down the road here, opposite Felixstowe, was Harwich Harbour. And Harwich Harbour was a naval station, but also lots of ships came in there with all sorts of things. And later, of course, just after 1940, Mussolini thought that he would join Hitler. He thought he'd have some spoils of war, and he joined Hitler, and of course they moved up into northern France, and they thought that they would come and raid Harwich Harbour. So they came over with their Fiat BR-20 bombers, escorted by the Fiat CR42 fighters. There's some models of those upstairs. They came to Harwich Harbour, but the planes from Martlesham took off at another station, and I can't remember the other station, but they shot these planes up and they took flight and ran. But not before one of the bombers here crashed in Tangham Forest, which is just about 5 miles down the road here. And that's the bomber there. On the bomber were some cheese, Chianti wine, and of course the Italian helmets. They always came prepared, the Italians, with food and drink. And the spoils of war, so it said, turned up on the officers' mess table for supper. So there you go. But also, one of the little CR42s crashed on Orford Ness, Orford Island, the one that I told you about earlier. This is a picture on the internet, a famous picture. Not a lot of damage, as you can see. The plane was rebuilt, flown here at Martlesham, and one of our vice presidents, a Captain Eric, in brackets, Winkle, because of his size, Brown, was a pilot who was tasked with flying every single captured aircraft. He flew all the German aircraft and all the jets as well, which was quite a feat. He still holds to this day, he's still alive, 90-something years of age, he's our vice president.
Oh, he's still living.
He's been here a couple of times to talk to us. He still holds umpteen records, particularly for deck landings on aircraft, and of course for flying more aircraft than anybody else in his logbook. But that aircraft now, if you go to RAF Hendon Museum in North London, that aircraft is in that museum.
Is that right?
Yeah, yeah.
I'll be there.
Shot down by planes from Martlesham. The kids always ask, was Douglas Bader here? And we say yes he was, but only for a short period of time. And there he is there with his crew. Wasn't a very well liked character.
I was going to say, who's Douglas Bader? I don't.
Okay, the man with the tin legs?
Legless.
No, you may not know, but he's in this country he is a legend.
Oh, okay.
He is a legend.
There is a movie.
Oh.
Was a movie made called Reach for the Sky.
Sky,
If
yeah.
you ever get a
Watch
chance,
it.
yeah,
Okay.
it tells you it's about him.
Okay.
Reach for the Sky.
Reach for
It's
the
very,
Sky.
very good.
Yeah.
He lost his legs in an accident, both his legs, but persevered, and he got flying again, and he became a fighter pilot. And he was captured, and one of his tin legs was either damaged or lost, and the Germans agreed that we could fly out another leg and drop so that he'd have his second leg back. And so the second leg was dropped, picked up, and but he was notorious at escaping. He really was a determined chap.
Do we know any of those others? Who's the chap on his left? Wasn't it?
No idea, Robert.
Yeah. A lot of people always say, well, who are the others?
Yeah, obviously part of his crew, I suppose. And some of them may not all be English. They might be Australian or South African or something like that. Being close to the sea, of course, pilots having to come across the North Sea or the Channel, the Americans and ourselves, or the Americans later on when they entered the war, we were losing lots of aircrew to the sea. If they crashed in the sea, the chances of their recovery before they were, before they died through hypothermia, was great. So here at Martlesham they formed the Air Sea Rescue Squadron, and these aircraft, the old Supermarine Walrus, and there's a beautiful model upstairs of one, would fly out after being spotted by other aircraft from Martlesham. They would fly out, land on the sea, pick the crews up and return. Lots of heroic attempts, lots of medals were awarded to these particular guys, because lots of times when they landed and picked the crew up, it was too rough to take off. And there are stories of them taxiing across the North Sea, bringing the crews home.
At RNAS at Yeovilton, they have a walrus there, and I used to feel it's just thin, thin alloy, nothing of it, that enormous engine in that little frame, and as Martin says, one of them evidently picked, it's reputed to have picked either 7 or 9 chaps up from the sea on the Belgian coast, came all the way up to Great Yarmouth.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Now, of course, the Americans weren't in the war at this particular time, but there were lots of Americans who wanted to come and fly and take part. For what reason, we don't know, but one of the reasons could be, of course, ancestors. Lots of their ancestors came. Perhaps they wanted to come over and help us. A lot of them perhaps wanted to do something a bit more exciting than spraying crops and flying in a circus. And so they came over here, and that's the slide I've got to alter now, because I learnt the other day, I think there were 244 Americans came over, and they formed 3 Eagle Squadrons. They were called the Eagle Squadrons. They flew in combat, and several were killed. But that was before that America entered, before Pearl Harbor.
They were considered part of the RAF?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah,
They flew in RAF uniform, didn't they?
they did, yeah.
Oh.
And of course it wasn't until the 7th of December 1941, when Japan attacked Pearl Harbor, that America came into the war. But you would think, if this happened, that the Americans would go all out, and you probably can tell me better than this, but all out to annihilate Japan at that time. But Mr. Churchill, our leader, went over to America and spoke to the President and of course all the senior officers, and how he did it we don't know, but he convinced them that their best route was through England first and then on, and that's why
Good thing.
that came about. Yeah, he did it. He was a brilliant leader,
Oh,
without a doubt.
Wait, now, when did Churchill become Prime Minister? With Chamberlain was...
Yeah, he was to start off with, and then Chamberlain lost, of course.
general election.
He lost it really because of the, him going to Germany.
Wasn't there something about Chamberlain almost was kind of wanting to
Yeah,
have
signed.
an agreement with
Yes,
Germany
yes,
or
yes,
something?
yeah.
Oh.
And of course,
Well, he did actually. He had this
Yeah.
agreement, came back and said, we have this white paper, there will be no problems, no troubles.
Peace with honour.
Yeah,
Yeah.
peace in our time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So Churchill is still a hero.
Oh,
so
yeah.
Churchill was, yeah.
Well, he was
yeah.
was Eldon's hero.
Yes.
Yeah.
So 1943, the 356 fighter group arrived. 3 squadrons, and they came with the P-47,
So which
Cool.
squad was Dad part of?
359.
359th. Yeah, this was called the Jug. It was a radial engine, very thirsty aircraft that could take a lot of punishment before it had to come down. The only problem was it was so thirsty on fuel it couldn't support taking the bombers over to Germany and back. That was its problem. So it was later replaced, of course, by the P-51.
Did Eldon fly the P-47, the Thunderbolt?
He started out at P-47, but they switched to P-51s
Yeah,
while he was here.
yeah.
Of course, Playford. This was Playford Hall. This was the sister place, if you like, to where you stayed last night. It's a moated house, and of course, when we went there with the 356, you would all say, "Oh, an English castle." It isn't a castle, but because it got a moat round,
Yeah.
and castles notorious always had a moat round, didn't they? But yeah, so this was the house. Owned today by Mr. and Mrs. Innes, who still accommodate us. If somebody comes back who stayed there, Mr. and Mrs. Innes will always allow us to go down and have a look to see.
And how far is that from here?
Probably as
3
the
or 4
crow
miles.
flies, 3 or 4 miles. Yeah.
Oh, so it's far.
Easy peasy, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
In actual fact, just a quick one, Clarkson, I've forgotten his name now, who started the abolishment of slavery, used to live there as well.
Oh, really?